My name is Chris Rivett. I manage communications for the professional referee organisation. I'm joined today by two top officials of their generation. I think I can say that. And I have Mark Geiger here, who's the general manager of the professional referee organisation, and Anthony Taylor, a current Premier League and FIFA match official. Today's session is called Stuck in the Middle with You. So we're going to be exploring the evolving landscape of the modern game of officiating. So looking forward to something that doesn't happen all the time for you, which is we'll hopefully start and end with a smile. We've got a happy audience today. And the good news that I can bring is I'm under immense pressure delivering a session on officiating when it comes to timekeeping. So this will be either the last time you see me, if it's not run, so we need to be here for 30 minutes. So I appreciate your time coming to join us today. I'm going to start with a very quick introduction of our guests. So Mark enjoyed 15 seasons as an official, refereeing in MLS. He was the referee of the year for MLS in 2011 and 2014, and refereed the 2014 MLS Cup. He was on the FIFA panel from 2008 to 2018, refereed at the Olympic Games in 2012, 2014 and 2018 FIFA Men's World Cups, and was the first American to referee a knockout game at a Men's World Cup in 2014, and has set a standard that's now been followed over the last cycle of World Cups, the men's and women's games. We had 19 out of 32 knockout games that had at least one American official. So, also, the final game of your career, Mark, was the 2018 FIFA Club World Cup, where you were the AVAR for the final. Anthony, 16 seasons and counting in the Premier League, refereed the 2015 English League Cup final, 2017 and 2020 FA Cup final, and was on the FIFA, or is on the FIFA panel since 2013. Refereed at the 2022 FIFA World Cup, and was the referee for the 2022 FIFA Club World Cup final. Also refereed the 2021 UEFA Nations League final and the 2023 Europa League final, and has the unique claim to fame as being the only referee to referee an FA Cup final with and without VAR, which is on trend for today's discussion. So we'll get stuck into the big questions, Anthony. Comparing your experiences to when you started refereeing professionally, what are the key skills that you've had to adapt and develop over the last few years to keep pace with the evolving game?
I think one of the big challenge now in elite football for officials is the level of scrutiny, and everybody expects you to be absolutely perfect every single game, and so that in itself brings significant challenges for us. Our focus normally is on three key aspects of the physical side, the psychological side, and the technical side. But probably one of the overriding key skills we need to try and address is the challenge of overcoming fear. So every single person in this room, no matter what role you do within the game, everybody's fearful of failing or making mistakes. And that's never more true for those of us that are officiating at the top level of the game. Because when we make a mistake, it's in front of billions of people. And that's quite a unique psychological concept. To make that mistake, move on from that mistake, and even with the use of technology, in a split second say, I've made a mistake, I'm going to change my mind. And so from the key skills aspect, that mental resilience and the clarity in your decision-making processes is never more so important in the modern game.
Talk about fitness. The game's changed so much. An example being, the days of standing on the halfway line for a goal kick are gone. Teams are playing out from the back now. So how have you had to change your approach to be ready for those moments where you've got to be on top of a penalty area, but you don't want to be too close that if there is that big ball out from the back, you've then suddenly got to be on your shoulder and stuff like that. So how does that work from a fitness programming perspective?
I think from a basic fitness perspective, very similar to how a team would prepare. And so particularly going into matches in a tournament setting, for example, it's always important that you're prepared to make sure that you can last for 120 minutes and not just the 90. And the training should be more difficult than the physical demands of the game. And then once you link that to the technical preparation, the tactical preparation of how different teams play. Do the teams like counter-attacks? Is it more possession-based, control behind the ball, playing in triangles like a lot of the top teams do nowadays? It's then having that ability to then react to the changes in play. And so sometimes the physical challenges in the top games, maybe not so much always at the highest level, because it's more about having the ability to read and adapt on how those top teams play and adjust the tactics during the game.
I'll bring you in, Mark, on the same question, but from a technology advancement perspective, you obviously finished your career just as video review is coming into play. You then moved into the instructor space before you became the general manager at Pro. So how did you adapt towards the end of your career with some of those advancements?
Yeah, I always said I was going to retire before VAR came in, but I did get a snippet of VAR, which was good. But it's amazing to think I started in MLS in 2004. And at that point, it was a whistle, it was a yellow card, a red card, and a watch, and that's all you carried out onto the field. So now we have heart rate monitors, we have goal line technology watches, you have your heart rate watch, or an Apple Watch for Major League Soccer. We have beeper flags, we have communication kits, we have a button for in-stadium announcements, and of course we have VAR, which has been such an incredible tool for referees. But it's been difficult to adjust to that. Anthony's talking about the fear that a referee may have in making a mistake. Now there's an opportunity for a referee to make two mistakes. If the original decision and then having to go to the monitor, and there's a real psychological aspect to VAR, because growing up and coming up through the system, or even in MLS before VAR was introduced, we had one opportunity to see something, and it was very forgiving. People understood that in the speed of the game, we had one opportunity to make a decision. But now it's now going to a monitor. It's taking the time to look at all the different angles, look for small details of a situation, and come away with a decision. And no matter what happens, if you change your decision, you're now announcing to the world that you made an error. And we were so good before VAR in selling a decision, whether it's right or wrong, selling the decision, communicating with the players, and being able to stand up to your decision. But now with VAR, we have that psychological aspect, which has been very difficult for referees to transition through, especially the referees that are younger, just breaking into the professional game.
How do you deal with that mindset-wise?
For me, when it came in, I was very fortunate because I was towards the end of my career, so I was confident enough in my decisions that if I made an error, and I made many errors throughout my career, I looked at it as an opportunity to walk off the field knowing that it was correct. I've had that opportunity to see it. Many times prior to this, you'd have to wait until you got into the locker room, take out your phone, or you have some text messages from friends asking you how you made a certain decision or how did you come to that conclusion. But now with VAR, I looked at it as an opportunity to walk off the field knowing that every critical decision was going to be a correct one. But again, for the younger officials that are trying to break in and worry about every single error, that's something that's going to weigh in the back of their minds.
And just all that technology you touched on, how much of that is your responsibility as an official to charge up and bring with you in your kit bag, and what's waiting for you in the locker room?
Almost all of it.
Yeah. So that's one area where you haven't got so much to concern yourself with. And just moving on from that, you mentioned communication, and you did as well. How important in the modern era now is communication, with your crew, with the players, with the coaches, and what goes on and off the field to support that relationship building?
Yeah, it's critical, and it's all about relationships. It's getting into the professional games so much more than just blowing a whistle and pointing or showing a yellow card or a red card. It's all about building relationships from the very first minute of the game. If you're working with players for the first time, it's about controlling emotions. It's about bringing them down off a ledge. It's about explaining decisions. It's about prevention, so that you don't have that big decision in a little bit where you need to award a penalty or issue a red card. So it's such a key element or a key skill set for the top referees and even fourth officials as well, dealing with the benches. A referee, if they don't want to talk to somebody, it's very easy. You can run away, you can move to somewhere else on the field, but fourth officials having that skill set to manage coaches and to talk to them and to listen to them, you know, to hear what their concerns are and then communicate that to the referee so that they can adjust something that they may need to adjust as well. It's such a critical aspect of the top referees.
I say this respectfully. Obviously, you've transitioned from the field now into a leadership role. The coaches that you deal with in MLS are players that you would have had a different relationship with. How has that relationship evolved over the 2 years?
Fortunately, I was able to establish some good relationships with many of these players that I'm dealing with, and maybe they're not coaches, but they're chief soccer officers or general managers now. So those relationships that we built over time has become really critical in my role right now, because now it's easy for them to call, you know, pick up the phone and talk through situations in a very respectful way.
And that communication, that happens obviously in a country like this over Zoom calls and telephone calls rather than anything too in person. But how often do you actually get that contact time with the coaches as a group?
Ideally, I don't want to be talking to anyone on a Monday morning, as that means that the officials all did well on the weekend. But for sure, we're going to be talking to a few clubs each week.
And Anthony, just expanding on that conversation while you're on the field, given the level of diversity now that we have in the game with players and coaches, what techniques have you developed that have allowed you to communicate effectively with those players and coaches?
I think the most important thing to remember is it's all about balance and control. So it's the aspect of trying to make people understand why you've made a particular decision. Now, of course, they don't always like the outcome sometimes, but I think one of the trends in the modern game also is there's a lot of ignorance around what the current law is and how that is applied. And so I think one of the things that we always need to work much harder on doing is helping educate people about our decision-making process. So again, it's not about getting people to always like and accept that we've made the correct decision, but more about the process and why. So, you know, contrary to popular belief, we don't deliberately go out there every weekend to upset everybody, and so we usually work to a very rigid framework of criteria to try and make that decision, because that's what is best to do in a high pressure situation. So a high pressure situation, you need clarity and you need simple frameworks to apply. So whether it's an offside or whether it's handball or whether it's when we're judging whether a tackle should be a yellow or a red card, we are always working to some guidelines. But our job is really unique because many times it's very, very subjective. We work in a lot of grey areas. So we could play a clip now, and the middle part of the room will think one thing, this side of the room will think another, and this side of the room won't have an idea at all what they're going to do. And so trying to get people to buy into the process, and that's the challenge you have on the field with players and coaches as well, that balance and control. Mark's already mentioned about emotion, and you have to be able to adapt to the different kinds of emotions that teams display. So depending on which part of Europe or the world a team comes from, that might present additional challenges in terms of their expectation of what is handball or what is not handball, or how they might react to a player pushing them over from the opposition. And so I usually draw on my experience as a prison officer. I was a prison officer for 14 years. I specialised in mental health and riot training. Not that I'm advocating that we go on the field to have fights or anything like that. But I certainly find the skills I learned in that setting really useful when I'm communicating with different people, because you're dealing with people who are angry, who want to be confrontational. And the easiest thing to do to try and keep that balance and control in a game is if a player is angry, my objective was always, at the end of a conversation, to make sure he's not angry. And if he's still angry, I still need to take my time to do this. And so there's different techniques for that.
Yeah, I was going to ask you
Yeah.
how do you manage that? Because different people are going to react differently in different levels of emotion.
Yeah, of course. And so an easy solution is to learn a variety of languages. But we're fortunate that English is normally the main language in a lot of matches. I think the most compelling aspect that helps control, and I found this has worked at home with my wife and my children as well as in prison, is how we communicate with our eyes. The more eye contact that we have with people, the easier it is for people to understand and to bring people from here to here. That's the most important thing, and creating that time and space. And so, of course, you have to understand that people are going to be upset sometimes, but that can actually happen to us as well on the field. People forget that as an official when you're in really difficult games. We sometimes don't engage with people how we should engage with people. If we know we've made a mistake, it's an interesting concept that Mark was saying before. Nobody really talks about, since VAR came in, a referee goes to the screen and we're expecting somebody in front of 90,000 people in a stadium and billions of people worldwide to, in a split second, go, actually, I've made a mistake. I don't think there's anybody in this room who would actually admit that quick to making a mistake in your job or at home. And so you have to contain that while also explaining to other people why you've made a decision on the field. And still accept at the end of it, people might not agree with you still. And so always that balance and control. Always that balance and control.
Is that where your relationships with your crew come in? That you've got, your team is there to keep you focused on it? Because I think unfortunately, we don't get the opportunity to really show people is the 30 seconds after you've walked back on the field, how that relationship then works and how they're telling you, right, move on, next job.
Yeah, so a big part of my job, other than making decisions and trying my best to get those decisions correct, is about how I lead my team before, during, and after the game. And really, if we're talking about a high-performance culture, then teamwork underpins all that. Quality decision-making comes from quality teamwork. And so I certainly invest a lot of time in developing that team ethic with the same two guys that I've worked with for nearly 10 years now. So it's important to me. I understand what makes them tick. It's important to me that they understand me. And so they know if I'm going off on a tangent where I should not be going, or if I'm talking complete rubbish with a decision, that they try and bring me back on track. And it helps you deal with difficult situations. One of the most difficult things I've ever had to deal with was with the Christian Eriksen situation at Euro 3 or 4 years ago, where the only way we navigated our way through that situation after Christian's cardiac arrest was it purely came down to teamwork, because that was a situation that was unique. It had never happened before, and unfortunately, it happened in the third game of one of the biggest tournaments the world watches.
How soon into that moment did you know that this was that level of seriousness?
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, it was clear very, very early on that Christian was in some real distress. So I mean, the ball had come to him. It was thrown from the left-hand side of the field, and it bounced once in front of Christian, and as he goes to control the ball, and I'm only 15 meters away. Nobody near him. He falls flat on his face, and he's looking straight up at me. And the only time I've ever seen somebody have that facial expression is when people have tried to kill themselves before in a prison setting. So that, to me, drawing on my previous experience, helped me react really, really quickly. And then you're into a whole situation where there is no standard way to deal with things like that. The person who reacted the quickest was the Danish captain, actually, Simon Kjær, because he ran and he started CPR immediately as I was calling for medics. And the one thing that I learned from that situation, other than having to stay calm and be clear and show some leadership in that situation, is we're dealing with a people-centered environment. Football is a people-centered environment. I listened to Peter before talk about how important fans are to clubs. But when significant distressing situations happen, the most important person, of course, was Christian and his family. But you then have to consider the wider context of all the other players involved, the coaching staff, and then the spectators in the stadium. Because actually, we found that, his wife had came pitchside. Some spectators in the stadium left because they couldn't cope with the emotional burden. And in fact, when the game actually restarted 2 hours later, the Danish captain, he could not continue. He said, "I need to be substituted." And so a good default position for me that evening was about people-centered environment. Focus on the people, make sure people are okay, and then really everything else falls into place around that.
You mentioned life skills there. Now, I could have read out as many more achievements that didn't make the list of what you both have achieved in the game. Traveled across the world. You've obviously probably produced amazing memories away from the field. I'm interested to know what life skills has refereeing taught you that's actually then helped you in a life environment.
Yeah.
Start with you.
Yeah, for me, it's dealing with different cultures. So this sport has brought me to different cultures and different countries that I normally would not go to. I would not normally experience. So. And MLS, we have so many different cultures within that league, and you're dealing with these players and you're communicating with these players all the time. The coaches and the general managers and the people that I'm dealing with right now. It's opened my eyes to what we have all around the world. And it also helped me appreciate what people are bringing to the sport and what they're bringing to our conversations and our interactions.
Same to you, Anthony.
I think it's taught me how to deal with unique and difficult situations. I think the fundamental thing for me is the mental resilience of it. Like I said before, actually everybody's an expert in my job without actually having done it. On a weekly basis. And so, yeah, I think it's about that mental resilience and it's about us trying to help people understand our job a little bit more and break down those barriers so people actually, from a cultural perspective across the world, we start bridging that gap and start viewing officials in a more positive light, because there is an underlying problem across the world that football needs match officials, whether we are like that or not. And they're an integral part to the game, and we need to continue building those relationships and making it a more positive working culture for players, coaches, and referees.
Mark, put you in your GM role now, so we've moved away from that part of your career. When you get the group together for camps, as we do for 3 or 4 days every month, what's the one skill that you want to see an official continue to develop? What would be the biggest benefit to somebody listening here who's got an interest in that, in terms of what you can see as a skill that can always be improved?
Yeah, so with our group of officials right now, or starting next year with San Diego coming in, we'll now have 30 referees. That whole group is bringing a whole wealth of and spread of experience levels. We've had so much turnover recently. Next year, we'll have 4 new officials coming into that group. And I think that as we're talking about the communication with players and building relationships for the lesser experienced referees, that's really something that they need to work on. Establishing those relationships. They're going to go out onto the field for many games where they're going to be dealing with these players and interacting with certain individuals for the first time, and building those relationships so that by the time that they're veterans, they've built up a bank, so that they can make mistakes, or they can communicate better, and they'll have that good relationship with the players on the field. So for the younger ones, I really want them to focus on that player management, building those relationships so that they'll become veterans much faster. For the senior officials, it's very easy to get yourself in a rut, right? We have a lot of confidence the more games that you do in the leagues, and what you don't want to see happen for them is complacency, number one. And number two, start seeing that confidence turn into arrogance. on the field where you're so confident about your decision and the way that you interact that you're now putting off players, you're putting off teams, and not really continuing that good relationship that you've established from those early years and built over time.
You've put together a very experienced leadership team. You've got a South American lens in there. You've got European lens in there. You've got the North American lens. Is that also a skill that could apply to those in terms of how you want that leadership team to evolve over the next few years to meet the demands?
Like we said before, there's so many different cultures within the league itself, and there are many different cultures within our refereeing group. We do have European referees. We have North American referees. We have South American referees as well. So to be able to mirror that within our management group is really important because we're going to be coaching these individuals, and maybe the South American referee needs to hear from a North American, needs to hear from a European manager on how to deal with those types of players, and to get an appreciation for whatever they're going to see when they step out onto the field. And it's also good as well when we have Sandro Ricci right now, two-time World Cup referee, as our referee manager. So him being able to connect with the South Americans as well, understanding what their background is and how they were developed as referees, to help them be successful on the field. So to understand different cultures, but also to have somebody you can tap into that truly knows your history is going to be really important.
Well, we're making good time, Anthony. For anyone out there who maybe come into the room today with an open mind, who's now considering a career in officiating, what advice would you give them in terms of what they can do next and how they can progress?
We've got to show hands first of all. Anybody who fancies one, good
Well,
start, positive. So why should somebody get involved in refereeing? I think the fundamental part of it is it's about giving something back to the game that we all love. So it doesn't matter what you've done previously, whether you're an ex-player or a failed player or a coach or anything like this. It's all about giving something back and then turning that into being a role model for future generations. And so there's undoubted personal benefits in terms of learning new skills, communication skills, life skills. But I think the really important thing for us is that we need to increase the diversity in officiating across the world to match the diversity that's in all the different leagues across the world. And by doing that, it helps us better engagement with players. It finds that better balance and control in games. And from that perspective, encouraging different groups of people into officiating, it pushes the mantra of to see it, you can believe it can actually happen. And so the fundamental thing for me is giving something back to the game.
Excellent. I'd like to thank you both for your time. I'd like to thank you all for coming today. We looked at 30 minutes and wondered how we might fill it. And we hope we've given you a good overview of some of the challenges that you face today. Referees love assessments. Contrary to public opinion, they can't get enough of assessments. So I would ask, if you've enjoyed today's session, please go to the SoccerX app and rate it and give us some feedback. Hopefully this is something that we can go into a more interactive session in the future, but really appreciate your time today. And yeah, we'll be around for a couple of hours this afternoon if anyone's got any questions. So thank you very much.